In a quiet hospital room on the outskirts of Chicago, a man who once owned half the city's skyline lay dying. His name was Richard Harrington, a billionaire whose companies touched everything from real estate to shipping. Yet as the machines beeped softly beside his bed, the hallway outside stayed empty. No family. No old friends. No business partners. The nurses whispered that even his own children had stopped answering the calls. Money had built his empire, but it could not buy him one person willing to sit by his side in the final days. That is, until a black single dad named Marcus Walker walked through the door and changed everything. If this story already touches your heart, take a second to subscribe to Whispers of Heart 0.2, hit that like button, and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Your support helps us share more stories that remind us what truly matters. Marcus was 38, a widower raising 2 young boys in a small apartment on the south side. He worked nights as a janitor at the same private hospital where Richard lay. Most evenings Marcus mopped floors, emptied trash, and tried not to think about the unpaid bills waiting at home. One rainy Tuesday he was assigned to clean the VIP wing. The door to room 412 stood slightly open. Inside, an old man stared at the ceiling, his face pale and thin. Marcus had seen plenty of patients, but something about the silence in that room made him pause. He knocked gently. "Need anything, sir?" Richard turned his head slowly. His voice was weak but sharp. "If you're here for money, you're too late. Everyone else already took what they wanted." Marcus shook his head. "I'm just the night cleaner. Thought you might want the lights dimmed or some water." Richard studied him for a long moment, then looked away. "Suit yourself." Marcus poured a cup of water anyway and left it within reach. The next night he returned. And the night after that. He never asked about the fortune or the empty visitor log. He simply wiped the tray table, straightened the blankets, and asked if the pain was better. Sometimes Richard answered. Sometimes he only stared. But Marcus kept coming. One evening the old man finally spoke without being prompted. "You have kids?" Marcus smiled. "2 boys. 8 and 11. Their mama passed 3 years ago. We do the best we can." Richard's eyes flickered. "I had children too. They only call when the trust fund needs another transfer." Marcus sat in the visitor chair without being invited. Maybe they don't know how to show up. Sometimes people forget that showing up is the only thing that counts. The days stretched into weeks. Richard's condition worsened. Doctors spoke in low voices about organ failure and limited time. Still no family arrived. Marcus began bringing small things from home, a paperback novel his boys had finished, a thermos of coffee from the corner diner, a photograph of his son smiling in front of a second-hand bicycle. He never stayed long. Just long enough to make the room feel less empty. One cold night Richard's breathing grew shallow. Marcus arrived to find the heart monitor racing and the nurses rushing in. After the crisis passed, Richard reached out with a trembling hand and caught Marcus's wrist. "Why?" he whispered. "Why do you keep coming? You don't know me. I'm not a good man. I built my life on deals that left other people broken. I ignored my own blood. Why would a stranger care?" Marcus looked at the frail fingers gripping his arm. "Because nobody should die alone. My boys taught me that. After their mama left us, they used to crawl into my bed every night just so none of us had to be by ourselves in the dark. Kindness isn't about what a person deserves. It's about what a person needs. Tears filled Richard's eyes. For the first time in years he cried openly, shoulders shaking against the thin hospital gown. Marcus stayed until the crying stopped. He held the old man's hand the way he held his son's hands when nightmares came. The next morning Richard asked for a lawyer. Not to change his will in some dramatic way, but to write a simple letter. He wanted Marcus to have something small, enough to cover the boys' school clothes and a little breathing room on the rent. When Marcus tried to refuse, Richard shook his head. Take it. Not because you earned it by cleaning my floor. Take it because you gave me something money never could. You treated me like a human being when I had forgotten how to be one. Marcus accepted only after Richard made him promise to use part of it for a proper weekend with the boys, something simple like the zoo or a ball game. That Saturday Marcus kept the promise. He and his sons walked through the park under a clear autumn sky, laughing at the ducks and sharing a bag of popcorn. For the first time in a long while the weight on Marcus's shoulders felt lighter. Richard lasted another 9 days. On the final afternoon Marcus sat beside the bed reading aloud from the same paperback he had brought weeks earlier. Richard's eyes were closed, but his breathing stayed steady as long as the voice continued. When the last page was turned, Richard opened his eyes one more time. Tell your boys, he said, that an old fool finally learned what their daddy already knew. Kindness is the only thing that outlives us. Marcus nodded, unable to speak. A few hours later the machines fell silent. The hospital called the family. They arrived the next day with lawyers and stiff suits, but the room already felt empty of the only person who had truly been present. Months passed. Marcus never spoke publicly about the nights in room 412. He used the modest gift carefully, new shoes for the boys, a warmer coat for winter, and a small savings account that gave him hope of someday working days instead of nights. More important than the money was the quiet change inside him. He began noticing other lonely people on his shifts, an elderly woman with no visitors, a young father recovering from surgery while his children stayed with neighbors. Marcus started leaving small notes, extra blankets, or just a few extra minutes of conversation. He never expected anything in return. He simply remembered how one open door had mattered. Word of the story eventually reached a local paper through a nurse who had seen the nightly visits. The article was short and careful with names, but the message traveled. Strangers began leaving thank you cards at the hospital for the night cleaner who refused to let people face the dark alone. Marcus read a few of them to his boys at the kitchen table. The oldest looked up and said, "Daddy, that old man was rich, but you were the one who had something he needed." Marcus smiled and pulled both sons close. We all have something somebody needs. Sometimes it's just time. Sometimes it's a listening ear. Sometimes it's the courage to walk into a room nobody else wants to enter. Years later, when the boys were older and Marcus had finally moved to a daytime job, he still carried the memory of that hospital room. On difficult days he would remember the moment Richard's tears fell, not tears of regret alone, but tears of surprise that kindness could still find him. That memory kept Marcus steady. It reminded him that the measure of a life is not the size of the bank account or the number of people who claim to love you when things are easy. The real measure is whether anyone is willing to stay when the room grows quiet and the future looks short. Kindness does not require wealth or perfect circumstances. It only requires a heart willing to notice and a pair of feet willing to walk through an open door. Marcus Walker was not a hero in the newspapers. He was a tired single father who chose, night after night, to treat a dying stranger with dignity. In return he received something no fortune could buy, the knowledge that one person's quiet care can restore another person's faith in humanity. If this story stayed with you, carry it into your own week. Look for the empty rooms in your path, the coworker eating alone, the neighbor who no longer waves, the relative who stopped calling. You do not need grand gestures. A few minutes of presence can be enough to bring someone to tears of relief instead of loneliness. And when you do that, you become part of the same quiet miracle that once filled room 412. Spread kindness the way Marcus did, without keeping score, without waiting for the perfect moment. The world is full of people who believe no one would care. Prove them wrong. One open door at a time.